118. The stage is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, firstly, I'm going to introduce you to managing and influencing people's behaviour before discussing some potential indicators of people's involvement in sensitive or illicit behaviours. I'm then going to present you the randomised response technique, which addresses some of the inherent difficulties of asking people sensitive questions, before presenting the results of a case study conducted here in South Africa, where we adapted the logistic regression model in order to investigate potential non-sensitive indicators of people's involvement in illegal carnivore killing. So the management of natural resources and the conservation of threatened species often rests upon the successful management of people's behaviour. Whether this is done through the enforcement of existing laws, or the creation of positive incentives. Your interventions are likely to have most impact if they're directly targeted at the people who are most likely to be involved in the behaviours of concern. However, many behaviours of conservation concern are sensitive, either because they're illegal or they're socially taboo. And this means that people aren't necessarily willing to discuss their involvement in these activities because they might get punished for it, or they might get some sort of social opprobrium for being involved in it. As a result, identifying groups of people who are involved in illegal behaviours is problematic. So we saw that there was room to develop a set of non-sensitive indicators, so a set of innocuous questions, if you like, that can be used that can be tested and used as reliable indicators for people's involvement in sensitive or illegal activities. So, to introduce you to the potential indicators that we tested, within conservation, many studies have gone out and looked at people's attitudes, either towards a protected area or towards a particular species, generally with the belief that attitudes are a good indicator of people's behaviour. But the evidence for this really is mixed. So a number of studies have investigated general attitudes towards a protected area, reported that people held positive attitudes towards the protected area or towards their particular species of interest, but they either failed to engage in pro-conservation behaviours or they continued to be involved in behaviours of conservation concern. But we can learn lessons from other disciplines. So if we look at work done in social psychology, we'll learn that studying general attitudes towards a protected area or a species, whatever your interest is, studying the general attitude doesn't necessarily tell you a great deal about how people are actually going to behave. And within the discipline of social psychology, they would tend to suggest that if you're going to look at attitudes, they need to be really specific. So it needs to have a target, an action, a context, and a timescale that relates to the behaviour you're studying. So if you're interested in understanding if someone's going to poach a particular species, you would ask them, for example, to indicate their level of agreement with a statement such as the one shown here. So, I intend to poach, which is an action, a diker, the target, from within a protected area, which provides the context, in the next 12 months, which gives a time frame. Now, another potential indicator of people's involvement in sensitive activities, it arises from a social psychological bias that people have when they report the behaviour of their peers. So, for example, if you asked someone who's a cigarette smoker, how many people in the population, the population meaning your peers and friends, people you know, how many people do you think smoke cigarettes? If that person is a smoker, they generally give very high estimates of that behaviour. If you ask a non-smoker the same question, they give somewhat lower estimates of the prevalence of that behaviour in their population. So we wanted to test whether or not this systematic biasing of estimates of people's peers' behaviour can actually tell us anything about people's involvement in illegal activities. So it's wonderful having ideas about coming up with a set of innocuous questions that you can use as proxy measures of people's involvement in illegal behaviours. But as I said at the start, if you're going to investigate illegal topics, it's problematic to speak to people directly about these. And it's very unlikely they're going to reveal the truth to you. So for this reason, we want to increase our level of reporting of people's involvement in illegal behaviours. We need an accurate record of their actual behaviour. So we've used the randomised response technique. So the randomised response technique has been used across a range of sensitive behaviours, from illegal abortion, illegal drug use, academic cheating, and rule breaking and conservation. In comparative studies, it's reported you get higher levels of the sensitive behaviour reported, and this has been interpreted as evidence of more accurate reporting. And also in those few validation studies that do exist, so for example, where a researcher had access to criminal records and people in a prison, and they could compare direct questioning or randomised response technique questioning, they got more honest reporting that they could double check with people's actual criminal records. So RRT does get more accurate reporting of involvement in illicit behaviours compared to conventional survey techniques, even when someone is told that what they're saying is anonymous. So how does it work? So the randomised response technique, it reduces the risks that people perceive in giving an honest answer by introducing a randomising device. So the example I'm going to show here is actually just using a dice roll, but it could be a coin flip or a spinner with different colours on it, pulling a bingo ball out. So there are a number of randomised response techniques described in the literature. But the one that I'm going to do an example with you all is frequently called the forced response randomised response technique. It doesn't force anyone to do anything. It's just a name. And to show you it's not painful, I'm going to do an example with you all. So, all of you in the audience, I want you to imagine that you've just rolled one dice. And I need you to think of a number between 1 and 6. And you need to remember that number. You're not allowed to tell it to your neighbours. It's your secret, so don't tell people. So on the next screen, there's going to be some instructions. And I'm going to ask each of you to follow the instructions. And when I ask, first of all, I'm going to ask people who are responding yes to put their hands up, and then people who are responding no to put their hands up, based on the instructions on the next screen. So, have you all rolled your dice in your mind? Okay. So, if your dice just landed on 1, 2, 3, or a 4, you're going to raise your hand and answer honestly. In the last 12 months, did you break the national speed limits whilst you were driving? Perhaps not a very sensitive question. However, if your dice landed on 5, your answer is forced, and this is where the name for the method came from. It doesn't matter what the truth is. We request that you say yes. And if you imagined a 6, again, doesn't matter what the truth is. If your dice landed on a 6, you have to respond with a no. So, do you all know your answers? Okay. So, everyone who has to answer yes to this question, either because you're telling the truth because your dice was on 1, 2, 3, or 4, or you're being forced by me to say yes, raise your hands now.
So, since again?
If your dice landed on 1, 2, 3, or a 4.
Oh.
Okay. Or a 5. Okay. Right, then put your hands down. So all of you who are now going to say no because you're telling the truth, or your dice landed on a 6, raise your hand. There's not many of you. Okay, you don't normally get such a big split. So, we can see now. So, you raised your hand to say yes. Okay, I have no idea if you're telling the truth, or if your dice landed on 5. And similarly, the very few of you who answered no, I've got no idea if you're answering truthfully, or if the dice forced you to say no. But by knowing the proportion of people that you've forced to say yes, you can calculate the prevalence of rule breakers in your population without anyone having to reveal their identity. You don't need names or addresses. If you lose your data set, no one can pick it up and trace anybody through it. So the researcher is safe and the respondents are safe. So, human-carnivore conflict is a prominent example of a topic which is difficult to study directly. So some carnivores in South Africa are legally protected. Don't think I need to preach to the converted. You all know this. So we did a case study here in northwest provinces of South Africa to understand the proportion. So this was livestock ranchers and game ranchers. We wanted to understand the proportion of these ranchers killing 5 different carnivore species. The carnivore species were snakes, jackal, caracal, none of which are protected, you don't need a permit to kill them, and then leopard and brown hyena, both of which you do need a permit if you wish to control them on your land. We then also adapted the logistic regression model in order to investigate whether or not people's attitudes towards the existence of these carnivores on their land predicted whether or not they were likely to kill them. So we're testing, is that if you ask someone's attitude, does it really relate to their behaviour? And then the other indicator we tested, we asked these ranchers, how many of your peers, so how many of farmers like you, do you think kill each of these 5 species? So we would hypothesise for that last indicator. So if we go back to, if you smoke cigarettes, you think that lots of people smoke cigarettes. So the idea is, if you kill leopards, you think lots of people are killing leopards. So that's what we were testing using this method. So this just shows the results of the dice roll. So farmers, it was more complicated for them. They had 2 dice, which increases the probability of them actually having to answer the sensitive question. They're rolling 2 dice, adding up the totals. So there was a 75% chance that they had to answer that sensitive question. In the 12 months before this study, have you killed? And then they answered for each of the 5 species. So you can see from the results. So this is the proportion on the y-axis of farmers killing the species. And when I say farmers, I mean game ranchers and livestock ranchers. So most people were killing snakes, probably not a great surprise. And just under 45% were killing widespread jackal. Around 20% were killing caracal. However, 19% of our farmers were killing leopard, protected species. And around 6% reported killing brown hyena. However, because our error bars go over the 0 axis, we have to interpret that result with caution, and there is a chance that none of our respondents had actually killed brown hyena. So now when we started to look at indicators of behaviour, so we have split the group into 2. So this is the results of scenarios created through a model. So what we've done, we've said, okay, some farmers reported the attitude that they don't think that these carnivores should be allowed to exist anymore on ranches and they should be killed. And the polar opposite is farmers really disagreeing with that opinion. So if we just look at, this is their attitudes. So farmers who reported disagreeing with the statement that carnivores should be killed on ranches, actually across all species there was a lower likelihood that any of them had actually reported killing those species when they were asked to roll those dice and answer the question. However, in the grey shaded boxes, we have farmers who reported that they think that these species should be killed on ranches. That was the attitude that they ticked in the box. And when they rolled the dice, you can see there's across all species there was much higher probability that they had reported killing that species when they were asked to answer that question. And we see a similar trend in this, on the right-hand chart, it's estimates of peers' behaviour. So farmers who reported that very few of their peers, that they believed few of their peers were killing species, so the green bars, they were much less likely to have reported killing any of the carnivores compared to farmers who were giving higher estimates, so the grey bars. So what this tells us is that, as with the smokers, people who give higher estimates were actually killing the species. Okay. So we wanted to see whether or not, if you stick a few indicators together, can you pull apart different groups of people with the aim of targeting your interventions towards people with polar opposites in opinions. So this chart shows, we actually had 3 indicators. So this was, so we're just going to look at the leopard. The grey bar at the top, actually farmers who believed that leopards should be killed on their ranches, that they believe 100% of their peers are killing leopards. And the third indicator was how sensitive did they think that killing a leopard was. People who don't think it's sensitive at all, they were 70% more likely to have said that they killed a leopard when they rolled those dice. So it suggests that when you stick these indicators together, you can start to pull apart groups of people who are more or less likely to be doing illegal activities. So in South Africa, where many farmers and ranchers are sharing land with carnivore species, human-carnivore conflict is of conservation concern when you've got protected species like leopard and brown hyena being persecuted. And we find the fact that 19% of farmers reported killing leopard in the 12 months preceding the study of concern, given, particularly when you start to consider the low cub and subadult survival rates of these species. What we did learn from the study is that attitude, if you define it really clearly in terms of a target, action, time frame and context, it can be a useful indicator of people's involvement in a specific behaviour. And also the positive relationship that we found between so farmers who estimated that all of their peers killed an animal, they were more likely to have killed an animal themselves, and that it supports the existence of the false consensus effect, whereby people are supposed to bias their estimates of their peers' behaviour in accordance with their own behaviour. So quite a few people have looked at attitudes and how they relate attitudes towards carnivores, but they haven't actually looked at how these attitudes towards carnivores relate to people's behaviour that impact upon the conservation of a species. So we conclude from this study that we believe it is naive to expect respondents to respond honestly when you're asking them sensitive questions directly. And the randomised response technique is just one specialised technique developed in another discipline that could be more widely used in conservation when we're trying to understand how many people are involved in these activities. And our work on indicators, it can provide useful information for identifying groups of people to target interventions aimed at influencing people's behaviour. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Freya. Illegal behaviours and the killing of species. Comment, question, please, ladies and